So we're going to talk about the Cold War and the 1950s, and it's basically going to be like 4 videos on the Cold War, pretty much. It's pretty straightforward here. And then we're going to go straight into the Cold War. So this Cold War era happens right after World War II, and you end up with the U.S., and then you end up with NATO, and then you end up with the Soviet Union. And their communist allies, so Russia and all of the Eastern European bloc countries. And you're going to have this major tension take place between countries that embrace democracy and countries that embrace communism. And so it's definitely going to pit various leaders against each other as you have this struggle. And whether you're on the U.S. or the Soviet Union, right, all the leaders of both groups are going to praise their type of government, right, obviously. The U.S. Uses some very harsh rhetoric against the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union responds. Luckily, it remains a Cold War. It never escalates into a hot war because any confrontation between America and the Soviet Union during that time would have been World War III, and it would have been very likely nuclear warfare all out, which would have been, not good at all. So World War II, we do realize that some of the things, they're not going to be, the problems coming out of World War II are not going to be settled really quickly, particularly the idea that you have about 60 million people dead. That number is hard to comprehend, realistically. It's very hard to kind of think about that. 20 to 25 million people were killed in Russia of that 60 million during Operation Barbarossa. The Germans eventually lose, right, and they have to kind of withdraw from Russia, but not before killing 20 to 25 million Russians. You go, well, how did they lose if they killed that many? There's lots of Russians. There's a bunch of them, and they don't give up. And the Germans were killing everybody, women, children, babies, soldiers. They didn't care. They were killing everybody. The Soviet Union suffers, far more than anyone else does. Meanwhile, though, you have unprecedented economic prosperity in the United States. And the federal government is going to be a very permanent force in the daily life of Americans moving forward. Britain, France, Germany, and Japan are all completely devastated. Britain was from the Blitz, right, with France and Germany, the Blitzkrieg of France and all of that. And then you have the counterpunch by the United States and everybody as we went through Germany. We just wrecked shop. We talked about the bombing of Hamburg and some of those where we just firebombed the whole city. And so you basically, and then Japan, we dropped the atomic bombs and they were in pretty bad shape, right? And so really the only 2 countries left standing that didn't need crutches was the United States and the Soviet Union for the most part. And that's how you end up with these 2 superpowers, essentially. The Eastern Bloc nations of Europe had basically been consumed and annexed by the Soviet Union. But altogether, at the end of the war, the United States had spent about $320 billion fighting World War II, which we were pretty much the only country that could afford to do that. And because we had spent so much money, and a lot of that money had gone to American businesses in production of war supplies, American businesses were now doing pretty well, right? We had recovered. Great Depression is over. Everything's going great. Oh, you can't see this. I can barely see it on my computer. But this is the beginning of the United Nations, and y'all are aware what the UN is, right? So Europe is divided up between, into different blocks, and you're going to start creating the United Nations here, which is basically going to be the successor of the League of Nations. But Unlike the League of Nations that was created after World War I, that, remember, the whole idea was, oh, we're all going to agree not to go to war together. And then the United States was like, yeah, we're not going to be a part of it, though. And everybody was like, oh, if you're not a part of it, how are we going to keep from going to war? That's a good question. And so ultimately, after World War II, the United States decides, no, we will join what is now the United Nations, and that'll actually help keep peace. And that's kind of when we start becoming like the world's police force, essentially. And so, the whole idea here is that we're going to try and prevent another world war. That's the whole idea. Now, there is something called the Security Council, and this was some of the founding members here. You have like China, England, France, U.S., Russia. They all join. All right, so yeah. Now, there's still plenty of tension. One, because the U.S. repudiation of communism. Basically, they say, hey, this is bad. Communism's bad. We don't like it. And mostly because for communism to exist and to take over, you had to have these very violent revolutions. It often took away civil liberties from people that were in communist countries. And so America is like, communism bad. We don't like it. The Soviets are still kind of upset, though, that with America for not joining the war sooner. Because once the Germans kind of started attacking Russia, we kind of let 20 million Russians die before we did anything about it, which the Russians didn't like. They kind of were like, y'all took forever. Y'all were supposed to stand up for us when we got attacked, and then y'all kind of didn't. And, they were kind of just in their feelings, to be honest with you, just who cares? Get over it, bro. Well, I mean, seriously, it's not our fault. We didn't want to be involved in it at all anyways. But again, they said, you took your sweet time getting here. We have way more casualties. And so the Russians' idea is we want to make sure that we cannot get attacked in our home country again, like we have twice already, right? We've already had 2 world wars where the Germans have straight up attacked us. We need what's known as a buffer zone. And that's really the whole idea of the Soviet Union, is that Russia, although they needed the resources, Russia wants these Eastern Bloc European countries to kind of be this buffer zone between the rest of Europe and Russia. And so they kind of see this as, we have our sphere of influence. They're going to do what we tell them to. But, essentially, we can't just be attacked in our homeland again without, our knowledge and without seeing it coming. Now, Stalin, the problem with this is that Stalin is probably one of the worst leaders in human history. He is a complete and utter tyrant. Even after World War II ends, he goes on to kill millions of his own people because, maybe there's people there going, maybe we don't like communism. Well, then shoot him in the head. Seriously. Oh, you don't like communism? You're really not going to like this. Pow, pow. You ain't talking now, are you? And that's pretty much how he handled it. Also, he tries to turn Russia into this agrarian society that doesn't rely on all those outside forces. And if we grow enough food, we don't have to import anything. We can do our own thing. We're like a commune. We can shelter ourselves in. The problem is that they couldn't grow enough food, and millions of people starved to death as well. So, I mean, terrible leader. And so, essentially, you have this problem where Stalin says, I'm going to be the dictator. Well, there's no dictator in communism, technically. Not supposed to be, right? Everybody's in charge of the government. I'm just the one who's organizing it for everybody, even though you're a dictator. And the U.S. is going, no, we don't want communism to spread. We want everybody to freely elect their own leadership. And so you have this clear division between what America and what Russia thinks should happen with these countries. The Soviets have what's known as like kind of this land grab where they take eastern Poland, Romania, the Baltic states of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. They take parts of Finland, they take Czechoslovakia, and they just say, oh, all of this is ours, so y'all can't get close to us. And so essentially you end up with this. Hungary, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Romania, part of Germany, they take all this land here in order to essentially have this bubble between anybody being able to attack them. Then they say, well, we want half of Germany. We liberated half of Germany. We want half of Germany, essentially. And so they go, okay, fine. You can kind of have like this sphere of influence. We're not, certainly don't want to go to war with Russia right at the end of World War II. But at the, when they end World War II, they figure out, well, we can't let the Germans control themselves, right? So Britain and France and the United States and Russia are all going to like subdivide Germany into pieces, okay? So this is the Soviet zone. Then you have the French zone, the American zone, and the British zone, all right? And they're going to basically, until Germany gets their act together and we round up all the Nazis and make sure none of those crazy people are going to try and take back over and all this stuff, until we feel confident that they can be, play nice in the sandbox, we're going to basically just take them over. Well, the problem is the capital city of Berlin is entirely in the Soviet zone. And the rest of the countries, Britain, France, and the U.S. are worried that, well, if the capital is over there, the Soviets are eventually going to make a play to try and absorb all of Germany. And that would be catastrophic. There's tons of industrialism in Germany. The rest of Europe needed Germany to kind of be independent. And so what ends up happening is they say, well, we'll take the capital city of Berlin and we'll actually divide it into 4 zones also. And so you have the French, British, and American zone of Berlin, and then the Soviet zone of Berlin. Eventually, it doesn't take very long, the 3 sides here, the Americans, French, and British, they decide Germany's okay, they can control themselves. They let it reunite, and it becomes West Germany. The Soviets never relinquish control. They make the eastern half of the country and the eastern part of the city of Berlin remain communist, and it consolidates as East Germany. And so all the way up through the 1990s, you end up with East and West Germany. You didn't have a united Germany again until 1991, when the Berlin Wall falls. And so it's going to kind of look like this, Europe is, for another 50 years, essentially. That the Soviets control basically all of this, and then the rest of this is their own countries. And so it's pretty rough there. Now, again, the Soviets are never actually going to allow free elections to take place, ever, even though they promised that they would. Communism was like, no, just kidding. Which is not that weird. In fact, in all of human history, it would be more weird if they did have democratically elected people, because that was not normal for all of human history. But the Soviets basically would say, oh, we're going to have free elections, and then they'd have like the one guy who was a communist running, and then the other guy who was a communist running, and then they'd be like, you can vote between these 2 communists. And then the Communist Party would pick which one they wanted everybody to vote for, and then they'd stand outside the ballot box and be like, make sure you write the right one on there, and put guns to people's head and be basically, make sure you vote for the right communist. So it wasn't free elections for sure. Roosevelt didn't like Stalin, obviously, because of this. He said Stalin is not that kind of man. He doesn't want anything but security for his country. This is Roosevelt, right? This is before the war ends. So him and Stalin kind of had an understanding. He doesn't like him, but he kind of has this understanding. I think that if I give him everything I possibly can and ask nothing from him in return, he won't try to annex everything. We can work together for a world of democracy and peace. Clearly, he was wrong. And when FDR died during the war and Truman takes over, Stalin just backs out completely on everything that he had promised. Stalin's viewpoint was whoever occupies a territory also imposes his own social system on it. Everyone imposes his own system as far as his army can reach. It cannot be otherwise, which does make sense. Basically, like, if your military can control it, you can make the rules. And so he wanted to extend communism as far as his military would allow him to. Our idea was we're going to use our military to keep you from doing that. But we don't want to go to war with each other, so we're just going to yell at each other for 50 years and threaten each other. We also, the United States, the Soviets, who had also suffered at the hands of the Japanese, wanted some say in how Japan was restructured. And the United States said, well, as long as you're communists, we're not going to let you have any say in it whatsoever. This kind of was, pissed them off, not very happy about it. And so that was, again, some of the early tensions there. There's a man who ends up, giving this speech. What's his name? I just lost it. I think it was Churchill. I think it was Churchill. Yeah. And so Churchill gives this speech at Westminster College, and he's talking about how the Russians are extending into the Baltic, they're taking over Europe, and he mentions this idea of they're creating this Iron Curtain, which Iron Curtain becomes synonymous with the Soviet Union. It's kind of the idea of this is the Iron Curtain, this is where communism stops, and then democracy starts. So just kind of, Iron Curtain speech. It was a big deal. Could care less right now. Then you end up with the Truman Doctrine. The Truman Doctrine is basically this idea that if you want to prevent communism from spreading, you need to make democracy seem enticing and capitalism. So Greece and Turkey, they're having this communist rebellion. So in order to show Greece and Turkey how great not being communist is, Truman sends them $400 million. He's like, isn't money great? And basically is just trying to convince them, like, don't be communists. That's bad. So this begins our idea of basically like our containment policy. So our entire idea of like the Truman Doctrine is one of containment, that we're not going to go to war with Russia to prevent communism, but we're going to do everything we can to contain it where it already is. So we're not going to go in and invade Russia and try and overthrow communism, but we're going to try and keep it from spreading. And the biggest way to do that is to give money to people. I mean, if you showed somebody how good Coca-Cola tastes, why would they ever want to be communists? I mean, communists don't get Coke. Have you ever tried a Coke? You don't get that if you're a communist. Yeah. Yeah. Like Dr. Thunder or Mr. Pibb. Even though he dropped out of med school early, I still like it. He didn't quite get his degree, but it's still delicious. You don't have to be a doctor to make good pop. Pepsi's the best? Are you? Oh my gosh, you're a terrorist. Yeah, what a communist. Again, we're going to provide military and economic aid to these countries to basically prevent communism from spreading. And this is pretty effective. It does piss Russia off, though, because clearly they want everyone to be communists. Because when you're miserable, you want everybody to be miserable, too. So The National Security Act is passed in 1947, which creates, which gives the Department of Defense a unified armed force, and it helps coordinate and create the CIA as basically an intelligence gathering organization. Of course, it's involved in basically keeping track of everyone in the entire world, the CIA and the NSA, and they collect everything that you do all the time. And so the National Security Council, their job is to advise the president on international matters. And so this is all kind of playing into what's happening after World War II to try and prevent communism from spreading. The actual containment policy is created by a guy named George Kennan, who was a senior department policymaker at the State Department. And he wrote this very long telegram called it's like 8,000 words long. And it outlines how to stop Soviet expansion. It's called the Long Telegram. And my gosh, we just keep going here. And so the idea, again, if you don't understand by this point, we're trying to contain communism. He elaborates this policy in an anonymous article. He said that there's 3 types of containment that we can have: diplomatic containment by using places like NATO to prevent, trade and some of these things, or to prevent, countries' governments falling. Economic containment, we can support countries who aren't communist, and we can cut off economic aid to countries who are communist. And then through the military, we can actually build up our military, and by threatening to use that, we can keep the Soviets from trying to expand any further. That's the dangerous one there, because when we say military, we mean atomic bombs, which we started building at a rapid rate. Yeah, for real, we started building atomic bombs, we made atomic bomb grenades. Yeah, which that problem is you can't throw them far enough. So then it becomes an issue of you throw it and then you just threw an atomic bomb. And so you're throw it and then run, but then yeah, I don't know, but they made them everywhere. They made suitcase bombs. You could carry an atomic bomb in a briefcase. Yeah.
How far would you have to throw it?
So far, I would think. Yeah. So you also end up with the Marshall Plan, and you have the Secretary of State George Marshall. He gives a speech at Harvard University. He said that what America had done for Greece and Turkey, we should do for all of Western Europe, and which would cost us about $12 billion to help them basically reintegrate their countries into the global economy, to build them back up, to basically, we're going to rebuild the world. America became the bank that everyone used to rebuild everything that they had lost during World War II. So we essentially rebuilt Europe ourselves with our money. No wonder we felt like we had the right to tell people what to do. They literally rebuilt themselves with our money. But the idea was that if we don't rebuild them, those countries are going to be weak and they're going to be unstable, and that's going to open those people up to looking like Germany did, looking for somebody to come in and make things better, right? We're doing so well, we're let's just help them out. We'll be the ones that come in and tell them that things are going to get better, and then they'll follow our plan. We give lots of money. How tall the stack is how much money we gave. So in England, we gave lots and lots of money. And in France, we gave lots and lots of money. And in Italy and Germany and Belgium and Greece and Austria and Turkey, we give everybody money, trying to convince them that, hey, we're the good guys. You don't want to go be communist. Money's good. Capitalism, yay. Democracy, woohoo. There you go.